I'll call this hearing to order. I think all of you know that we lost one of our members uh, over the weekend, and I'd like to ask that we rise for a moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you very much. Senator Hennessy on 1445 relative to broadband matching grant initiative.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of House Finance. It's good to see everybody. I am Erin Hennessy, Senator for District 1, northern half of Grafton and all of Coos County, and I am here to introduce Senate Bill 445, which makes some technical changes to Senate Bill 85, which we passed last year, that established the Broadband Matching Grant Fund. And this fund was originally set up to use ARPA funds for a 50-50 match to our towns or our counties or our providers for bringing broadband to the homes that don't currently have it. And I think the pandemic highlighted the need for broadband in the state with everyone working from home or schooling from home. What the Senate did this year was to change that 50-50 to 75-25. So we're matching more of the federal funds against the local funds. So that'll help a lot more projects get done, especially for our communities that are using their local funds to do the expansion. And it also allocated all of the $122 million that we received from the federal government into the fund. The wording on the allocation does allow for the Department BEA to come to fiscal if they would like to spend the dollars for any other purpose that is follows the rules of the federal government. And there are purposes that I'm sure the department can tell you about that may happen. In the future, we are expecting another $100 million for broadband expansion and other connectivity expansion. So there are other opportunities to perhaps add money to this fund. But anyway, I'm happy to take questions that you may have.
Are there any questions? Yes, Representative Heath.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator. Will this finally bring the North Country fully on board? I can't imagine what it's been like for families that haven't had access during the last 2 years.
It is very difficult for a lot of people. There are plans underway to advance getting perhaps hopefully all of New Hampshire hooked up. I do believe that there's enough money in the fund to do that in the entire state of New Hampshire. And my apologies, I did forget that there is an amendment, 1351S, that adds one word to section 2B of the bill. And that's, if you're looking at the amendment, it's the word successful. Hold on, I'm trying to find where that is. Line 11, thank you. A provider who successfully challenges an applicant's eligibility. So it just adds successfully in there versus challenges.
Representative, sure, my mind is blank. Edwards.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I think I have just two questions. One of them is related to the phrase "make ready" process, and I'm unfamiliar with that term. Does that need to be defined somewhere in statute, or is that such a well understood term by normal people that I just am missing it?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sorry. I think someone who is more familiar perhaps from the department could answer that because they have rules set up already for this.
Sure. Okay. And then I'm glad there's an amendment to that picks up the word successfully, a provider who successfully challenges? Because when I read that multiple times, I didn't quite understand what we were trying to do there. So are you able to walk us through an example to help me understand what's happening there? If there's an application and the construction has already begun, but it gets successfully challenged, meaning what? What kind of a successful challenge would there be, and what are the ramifications?
So, and again, some people behind me could probably answer the questions to the what a successful challenge would look at like from an industry level. But my understanding is that if there's already a project happening and then somebody wants to get funds for another project that would duplicate the same efforts across to the same homes or to the same businesses, the provider that is already doing it could challenge that that wouldn't happen. And then if it's successful, then that person applying for those funds would not get those funds.
All right.
That's
Thank you.
layman terms.
No, I like that. I'll ask again. Thanks.
Are there any further questions? Representative Turcott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator, for taking the question. Could you explain to me why the 50-50 is not adequate and why you're looking for 75-25?
So the just looking at the numbers of the money that's coming into state for broadband, we have enough money to match 75% from this fund to the local 25% or provider 25%. So we don't need there's enough money from ARPA funding to do 75-25.
Sorry. Go ahead, please.
Senator, I just had a curiosity question. Once this is installed using a municipality and ARPA money, who owns it? Does it convert to an operator at that?
I think whatever the contract is with, I don't know if a locality would want to own and operate their own line, so I imagine it would be with the operator. But I think that's whoever the contract is with would
Okay,
have
thank
to
you. I just was
specify
curious.
that.
Representative Lynn.
Yes, I have a question sort of along the same lines as the last one, and that is it your understanding that a municipality is either legally limited to only contracting with one provider for the municipality, or if not legally limited, is that typically the way municipalities operate?
Well, sorry, thank you for the question. Looks like right now, but I know that if currently if an operator provides the service that's required, the upload and download speeds, and again, I'm not a techie person, so I don't understand all that side of stuff, but if there's already a provider that does that to the homes in your community, then there wouldn't be another provider that comes in to do that same service. That's my understanding. Somebody behind me might be able to correct me on that.
Thank you.
Representative Petrie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is not really a question. This is an answer. In my town, it was what they call a franchise fee, and the provider pays the town a certain amount of money to operate in our town.
Okay.
So that's the way our town works, and I imagine it's typical around the state.
Thank you.
Representative Turcott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I think I'll wait for somebody with the technical knowledge. You have another question.
Okay.
No offense taken.
By the way, don't ask me those technical questions, okay? Just in case you were thinking that I should know. Are there any further questions? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Irf, didn't see you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator. Just out of curiosity, why is Section 1 necessary? And why is the word appropriation used? These funds can already be approved, if I'm not mistaken, by the fiscal and governor and council to go for this purpose.
So, thank you for the question, Representative. Section 1, Senate, when we drafted this, and Senate Finance agreed to keep this in here because the state already has these monies, and we want to make sure that if any of these funds are used for another purpose other than the broadband matching grant initiative, that the legislature has an opinion on that, and they would go before fiscal to say, yes, we see that you are meeting the intent of the initiative, and we recognize that you need these funds for overhead or to do this other project.
Seeing none, thank you very
Thank you.
much. And I call on Chris Hodgson. Is that similar? Is that close enough?
You hit it on the head.
Okay.
Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Chris Hodgson. I'm Comcast Vice President of Government Affairs here in New Hampshire, and I'm just here to offer our support for this legislation, and really in an effort not to repeat anything that Senator Hennessy said, I'll just provide a couple thoughts and then make myself available to answer any questions that you may have. As she said, that the primary impetus for this particular piece of legislation after the legislature adopted what started out as Senate Bill 85 and then became a part of the budget last year is that when policymakers created the current statute, there wasn't a clear understanding of whether or to what extent or what the federal guidance would look like for the federal dollars that were coming down the pike. We knew and could expect that there would be federal resources for broadband, but we didn't fully understand what constraints or guardrails may exist. And this legislation seeks to just better align what was passed last year with what the final guidance was for ARPA's Capital Projects Fund and what the statute says for the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. We don't have final guidance yet on that latter bill, but the statute's far more specific than ARPA. So this was designed to accomplish that. I think just generally speaking, this may answer a couple of the questions that were asked. Providers in the state have done a good job over the last few years narrowing in on that last 3, 4, 5% of unserved. But while that's a relatively small percentage, we're talking about tens of thousands of homes and some businesses even in the state that continue to lack broadband. It's a reasonable estimate is anywhere between 20 and 30,000 remaining locations in the state. And it's not just the North Country, although the North Country certainly has its share of unserved pockets. Interior Grafton, interior Sullivan, parts of Cheshire, even a few remaining pockets in Hillsborough and Merrimack are unserved. And legislation like this will help to get over that hump so that we can finally substantially reduce those numbers. So our ask or urge of you is to support this. The amendment, while I haven't seen it before today, seems to make perfect sense. The purpose of the challenge provision is to ensure that these dollars are only spent where they're truly needed. We have 95.6% of the state that's covered, served by providers. We want to ensure that we focus these dollars and these partnerships in areas where people are truly lacking service. While $220+ million is a fantastically large sum of money, these are very, very expensive projects. It is not unusual to see construction costs run $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a mile. And when you're in a rural area with 4, 5, 6 homes, maybe 80% of folks will ultimately decide to take a service. You can imagine just how challenging the business model is. So with that, I'll conclude my testimony, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Representative Turcott, did you wish to ask your question?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. The question I had is, to be clear, a community or street or whatever that's already served by broadband would not be eligible for this?
That's correct. So broadband is a very binary exercise. You either have it or you don't. The way that the New Hampshire law is currently structured is to look at it in that fashion. It is a house by house analysis of where service is available, where service isn't available. And this anticipates directing those funds in areas that are unserviceable, excuse me.
Thank you.
Representative Petrie?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Some of these really remote places, wouldn't it be easier to just do a satellite?
It may be. And as a practical matter, satellite, either low Earth orbit or geosynchronous, is currently available in virtually all places. It's not universally available because of sort of peculiarities of geography. The federal funds are really intended to support the construction of wired terrestrial networks. They are structured in such a way to, for all intents and purposes, direct funds towards terrestrial networks and away from satellite. That's not the case of all funds. You may have heard of what is known as the RDOF, which is an FCC program, Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. Viasat and a couple other satellite providers are recipients of those funds. So that's another source of federal money that is available for those non-wired services. Thank you.
Representative Erf?
So that kind of answered my question, but to follow up on that, why is there such a strong bias to hardwired connections when not only are satellite connections available now, but more sophisticated ones and faster ones are coming down the pike, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, I think what we've seen, I began in the industry in 2006, and at that time, customer bandwidth consumption was in the high megabits a month, low gigabits a month. It's now nearing a terabit a month, 1,000 gigabits. And the speeds offered by these networks, our network is 500 times faster than what we were offering 15 years ago. So, and those enhancements have been made because the demand, the consumer demand for bandwidth is just continues to skyrocket. We see a doubling of the utilization of our network every 18 months. And modern terrestrial broadband networks offer levels of service, capacity, and have shown themselves to be broadly accepted by the consumer marketplace in a way that we just haven't seen with satellite. And I think that this decision to structure these ARPA funds and the BEAD program, which is coming down the road, is just a recognition of that on the part of federal policymakers. And there was a question about Make Ready, if I may.
Certainly.
So Make Ready is the process by which utility poles are literally made ready for an additional attachment like a broadband provider to go on that pole. It is a process regulated by the Public Utilities Commission, now in part DOE, and it is, it's a bit of term of art, but it is a well understood process. Access to utility poles is one of the few remaining monopoly choke points in the telecommunications industry. There's only one set of poles by and large in any given right of way. So it remains a regulated process, and how that occurs is well understood.
Representative Leishman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a question concerning the service areas. Now, I live in Peterborough, and there's some areas, as you know, probably, that don't have coverage in Peterborough and Sharon in Hillsborough County. But as recently as last fall, a company called Consolidated came into our neighborhood, put underground cables in, and presently Comcast serves our neighborhood. And I asked the service provider, why were they providing additional service? And they said, well, the federal government is paying for this, so we're adding this additional service to your neighborhood. It didn't make any sense for me at the time, is that what you're referring to, another federal program to provide service to communities that don't have it, but we already have it, but
Yeah.
somebody is paying for Consolidated to put this service in?
So if you go to the FCC's website and look under RDOF, Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, RDOF, you'll see a map of areas in the state of New Hampshire where certain providers have sought and been awarded funds. Those areas should not be in any area where there's already another competitive provider. And by and large, that's the case. I mean, they went through a process to make sure, like New Hampshire statute contemplates, they went through a process to make sure that these dollars just weren't spent where they weren't needed. And by and large, that's the case. There are areas, Sharon, there are areas of Greenfield, there are areas to the north and west of you that are RDOF recipients. So I suspect that there's just confusion about exactly why there was construction going on in your neighborhood, because for the most part, RDOF funds were not invested by the FCC for areas like Peterborough where there's already a provider.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there are there any further questions? Yeah, I know. Representative Bears.
Okay. I thought I was having a hard time today, Madam Chair. All right. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The question I have is that in Cowas County, there are areas where not on main roads, but on side roads, where a home would want to have broadband, but the situation exists that a provider refuses because the last connection is like a quarter or a half mile down the road, and they say that unless all of the homes along that stretch want it, they will not provide it to that home. Will this bill clarify that situation?
So I believe it will, because what's happening is, every provider has a different business model, but they try to apply their model to the market opportunity that they see in a given area. And that given area can be as small as one home, a street with a few homes, or a whole town. Yeah. And they do an analysis of whether or not they can make the numbers work. And if they can't, then they can. If they can, they can. And on the margins, I have absolutely seen situations, in Representative Leishman's community, there was a time when we sought to work out a similar deal off of Route 136, where we essentially were trying to make the numbers work by figuring out who's interested, who's not interested. We never had you have to hit this number to make it work, but it was an effort to figure out, can we make it work? And so you see that as, that goes to my earlier point about how really deploying broadband is a pretty binary exercise. You try to figure out whether you can make it work for a given house or not. And that's one provider's way of trying to figure out if they can make it work.
Thank you.
Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the amendment, do you have it in front of you? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to paint a picture for me, because these words are not creating a scenario in my head.
Yep.
A provider who successfully challenges an application's eligibility for funding because the construction has commenced shall complete construction as soon as practical and without undue delay. Who are the parties in this sentence, and what's happening here?
So the parties, as I said, the make-ready process is a regulated process. It includes timelines by which the various entities that are involved in construction have to or should comply. So those entities are the pole owners, which are typically the incumbent phone company. Sure. So those entities in the make-ready process, those entities are typically the incumbent, the two pole owners or one pole owner, the incumbent electric utility, the incumbent telephone utility, and then whoever the provider is who wants access to the poles. So that's one of the that's part of the process of getting these networks built is making those poles ready. And then the other party to it is the firm who's doing the work, the construction aspect of it, and then to a lesser extent, any sort of government engagement through permitting. That's almost never a constraining factor in construction, but it's a factor in it.
Okay, just
Thank you for the effort. I still don't understand the sentence. I don't know, like, a provider who successfully challenges,
Right.
who is that? If they're the ones doing the work,
Right.
then why would they challenge their own work?
Yeah.
Because the rest of the sentence then tells them that even if they're successful in challenging themselves, they still have to complete the construction as soon as possible. That's the way that reads to
Yeah,
me.
let me step back and maybe better explain it. So, the existing state law has a policy statement that says we want to invest only in areas that are unserved, that would otherwise not be able to receive broadband. And the way that you ensure that those dollars are being spent only in areas that need it is that you create, because of the lag time and the complexity of how many providers are in the marketplace providing service, the surest way to ensure that you're not spending money where it should not be spent is to have a process where a provider can say, I'm already providing service there. I've made the investment, we're providing service to customers, or we're currently building in that area. And the currently building piece can be months. It takes time to do this. There's some seasonality, and then there's that make-ready process to get the job done. So right now, to give you an example, so we currently have under construction network that includes 4,800 utility poles in the state of New Hampshire. It's about 125 miles of infrastructure. And that is like currently, budgeted by us to complete the work, actively in construction. That's a large, that's in a relatively large town, that's an entire town's worth of construction, road miles. So what the state law says is we do not want to use scarce federal resources there in those areas. We want the private sector to expend their money and build their networks. We want to focus the money in areas that are truly needed, and that's what the challenge process allows. It allows a provider to say, we already serve area A, or we're already currently building in area B. And as this was working its way through the Senate, the question was, all right, well, like, what does that mean? What does under construction mean? So this language explains what it means, which is it's an area where the make-ready process has begun, which is a well-understood process that has regulatory oversight by the PUC and DOE. And then language was added to ensure that once construction begins, it's done in an expeditious manner, which is the language used is shall be completed as soon as practical and without undue delay, because there was a desire to just make sure that all these areas get the service that's coming to them. So that's what that language does.
All right, thank you.
Representative Hatch.
And my apologies if this was covered, but I'm just thinking of Shelburne, and I know that's not part of your area, but so the dynamic has changed. In other words, so I'm thinking they were lacking broadband services for a considerable length of time, and my understanding was that there was not enough demand or enough potential customers to provide that service, and this changes that. Is that correct?
It creates the environment, right? And Shelburne's a good example. We don't serve Shelburne, but I'm
Yeah,
fairly
that's why
well
I bring it up. Yeah.
familiar with it. So in the last few years, the Spectrum, which is the cable company that serves the Androscoggin Valley, has begun to build out into Shelburne, stretching out from Gorham east. But there are still areas of the town that are not covered by their network. And then the incumbent telephone provider, Consolidated, has done the same. So with this program, the Broadband Matching Grant Initiative, allows is that for those unserved areas, a provider can, whether it's in partnership with a community, there'll be a partnership of some sort between the community, the provider, and the state to secure the resources to build out those areas that are not currently served. That's right.
And may I follow up?
Yes, you may.
So, and if this was covered, again, I apologize, but to prioritize who gets what, when, and again, I'm thinking of Shelburne. Now, what is that process, or is that dynamic changed, or is it by demand, or is it what up to the company's discretion, or how is that priorities established for unserved customers?
So I think currently, priorities are determined by an analysis of whether or not a given area is financially feasible, right? This changes that calculus in a way that says a lot more of these areas are now going to be financially feasible, right? Because there's a source of federal funds can be used to change the math. It's a lot harder. If you're asking me, how do you decide which project to build first? That is a lot more complicated, and probably it's beyond what I can answer now.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You know,
That's
I will say that we're a relatively large provider. We're currently building 40 different projects in 40 different towns of varying sizes right now. So it's not a linear progression in the sense that you put 100% of your effort into one, and then you move on to the next, and the next, and the next. So.
okay. Thank you. And I'm thinking you should move north, but anyways, thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Emmerich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll ask you the same question I asked Senator Hennessy. Once these funds are invested and there's a build out and you're the provider,
Yes.
do you take over those lines to maintain them and own them?
So that our expectation is that if we partner in this program, we'll be contributing whatever the non-federal match is, so the 25% minimum match. That'll be our contribution with our private at-risk capital. And then when the project is done, we'll own, operate, and be responsible for all upgrades and maintenance for it. The statute, it's not in the bill, but the statute that passed last year actually is very clear about that. No grant dollars can be used for maintenance. It's capital costs only. So that what that does, hopefully, is enforce some sustainability when companies are looking at these projects. You don't want to invest this money and then have someone decide that it can't sustain itself.
Representative Mooney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for testifying. Going back to that proposed amendment by Senator Hennessy, the line, a provider who successfully challenges, could we delete the words, because construction has commenced? And would that improve for clarity?
So, to be clear, Senator Hennessy, as I understand it, Senator Hennessy's amendment only differs from the bill that came over from the Senate, but with the addition of the word successfully. So it wouldn't be, it's not, the only change to the bill is the addition of the word successfully. I think our advice would be not to change the bill further beyond adding successfully, which I think makes sense.
Are there any further questions? Representative Lynn.
Thank you for taking my question. I guess my question is, am I understanding from the scheme of this that if let's say Comcast decides that it's going to build build out in some particular area, if you make that determination to do that and you get all the regulatory approvals and all the other things you need, do you get some, for lack of a better term, some monopoly protection in the sense that somebody else is sort of prohibited from building out?
We do not.
You don't
No,
get
so-
any, at any level, either from the
At any
PUC or the municipality or
No,
anything?
so the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which is successor to the 34 Communications Act, is very clear about how it treats these issues. There's no, for a cable company, there's no exclusivity. Any permitting that we receive from any community, which there was mention of a franchise, it's called a franchise in the industry, they're not exclusive. State law similarly was amended in the late 90s following the 96 Act to say the same thing. So there's no there's no like marketplace constraint or any monopoly authority inferred in any way at any level of government.
Are there any further questions? Representative Turcott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you say again how many households are not served currently in the state? About
Well,
roughly.
my estimate, I believe a reasonable estimate is between 25 and 30,000 households. Call them locations, because they may or may not be year-round residences, but call it 25 or 30,000 locations around the state.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And based on maybe past knowledge or data, out of those 25 to 30,000, how many of those would actually subscribe to service if offered?
Yeah. So penetration varies to some degree based on socioeconomic factors, but in general, in New Hampshire, 75%, maybe 80% to a wired solution, right? I want to distinguish in that way. So cell phone penetration in the state is virtually ubiquitous at this point. It's, I think, in the low 90s. But the market penetration for a wired solution is in the nearly 80%. There's no reason to think that this would be different for these areas.
Representative Turcott.
Thank you. You mentioned the socioeconomic factors. Most of the underserved right now, the 25 to 30,000, would that mean that a smaller percentage of those households might be interested in signing up, or would that still be 75%?
No, I think there's not enough variation there to change that top line number when you look at the whole state. So what we know from a lot of great research that Pew has done and other organizations is that adoption is a larger problem than availability. And this bill seeks to fix the availability issue, right? Make it accessible to people if they want it. The other issue here is adoption. And adoption is a complicated set of issues. It has to do with cost of service, access to hardware. It has to do with demographic issues. Older populations tend to adopt to a lesser degree than a younger population. It's a multi-factored issue, but I don't see any reason to think that 80%, high 70s, would not be the case across the areas that are unserved in the state.
Thank you very much. And I will call Michael Licata. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Michael Licata. I'm here on behalf of the New Hampshire Electric Cooperative. Just a little bit of background. First and foremost, we are in support of the bill. For those who aren't quite as familiar with the co-op, we are an electric distribution company. We serve 85,000 members across 118 communities throughout New Hampshire with electric service. Back in 2020, we formed a broadband subsidiary, New Hampshire Broadband, to address a lot of the issues that were discussed today for our members, to make sure that our members, our electric members, had access to high quality, reliable, high-speed internet service. That was a serious need that certainly the pandemic helped to bring to the surface in many ways. We've taken a number of steps to address the issues of limited broadband access. We applied for and were successful in getting CARES funding in 2020 With that funding, we were able to connect 1,100 previously unserved households and businesses in Colebrook, Stewartstown, Clarksville, and Leominster. We're currently expanding to provide service to the communities of Ackworth and Sandwich, which will make high-speed internet available to another 1,800 locations in those communities. And we just recently announced a major expansion into Grafton County that will provide service to co-op members in 32 towns. And we estimate that's around 17,000 locations. So a lot of activity, and certainly the availability of federal funding and support is critical for our efforts, as they were with CARES. Mr. Hodgson mentioned the RDOF auction that the FCC ran. We were a participant in that, and we did receive funding to build out 70 census block areas throughout the state with high-speed internet. So critical issue. There's a lot of work to be done. We are supportive of the bill, and I just want to highlight two critical areas of support. One is the flexibility that the bill would provide the BEA to administer the funds. There is, as was previously discussed by Senator Hennessy, a lot of federal funding that is coming in through the infrastructure and ARPA bills that were passed. There is the Senate Bill 85 process that this is largely aimed at making changes to, but flexibility on how those funds can be used and applied in different ways, so it's not a one-size-fits-all. And then the second is flexibility on compliance with the federal requirements of the different funding opportunities. So the ARPA Fund has sort of different rules to it than the infrastructure fund. And at the very last page of the bill, it provides flexibility that the federal guidance and the federal requirements are sort of the prevailing issue. So if the state rules are in conflict with the federal rules, it gives flexibility for the federal rules to be utilized. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Are there any further questions? Some of us actually voted on that to let the co-op do broadband. It makes so much sense that you already have the polls. Okay, yes, Representative Petrie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Now, are you controlled by the PUC currently?
So we are not rate regulated by the Public Utilities Commission. So the PUC exists to balance the interest of shareholders and customers. We're a nonprofit. We're owned by our members, so there isn't that balancing. There are certain areas where we are still regulated by the PUC, energy efficiency and sort of customer disconnections and payment arrangements. But by and large, we are governed by our democratically elected board of directors.
Thank you.
By the way, we like it that way. So, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Oh,
Madam
did you
Chair.
have a question, Representative Leishman? Sorry.
No, no problem, Madam Chair. Thanks. So the previous question I had concerning the build out into areas that already had, say, Comcast service, in those federal funds that you obtained, did you build into areas that already had service or was completely unserviced?
So they are unserved. Most of the federal funding does not allow the federal funding that we had previously accessed. So the CARES funding, as well as the RDOF funding, it was specifically for areas identified by the federal government through the FCC maps that do not have service.
Thanks. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any further? Yes, Representative Heath.
Thank you. My question is with regard to the socioeconomic group of people that are unable financially to access. Is there, and I don't know very much about all of this, is there a priority for you, for Comcast, for whomever, to make some kind of scholarships or some kind of funding available to those individuals? I mean, it is costly. I mean, I know how much I pay a month for my service, and I'm sure that there are many, many families that can't afford to pay what the cost is. So how is that handled, and is that any part of the federal requirements?
So, yeah, so I'll address that in two ways. The first is, yes, affordability is a part of the criteria that the federal government has identified specifically, that needs to be weighed. In addition to making funding available for capital construction, the federal government has also made a affordability program available to help offset the monthly cost of programs. As the electric co-op, we're non-for-profit. Affordability is absolutely something that is critical and important to us and in the center of why we're doing this. So, we talk about ensuring access, affordability, and reliability. Affordability is a key area for us as well. And when we structure our broadband plans, we really do try to keep that in mind. So in addition to the federal funding, making sure we're operating essentially at cost.
Yes, Representative Walls.
Just a quick question. I know Comcast has a program that's, I think, $10 a month for low income. Do you offer the same program?
We don't at this time, but we are actively working on rolling out exploring a low income program. And as I said, there is the federal affordability program that, I mean, quite frankly, customers who would take advantage of that would be paying essentially $10 a month for our service.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony and appreciate what the co-op does, by the way. Okay. So I have no further anyone signed up to testify. So I will close the hearing on 1445 and open the hearing on SB 402 relative to financial assistance for municipalities affected by disasters. I did. Oh. I said, I did see Senator Khan here. He was hiding on me. Okay. Welcome. We're happy to have you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to see all the familiar faces. Senate Bill 402's genesis is out of two disasters that were declared by the President and FEMA that our Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management observed this last year in Cheshire and Sullivan counties. These two disasters were the result of significant rainfall that occurred in two separate storms in July and impacted 21 different towns in Cheshire County and Sullivan counties. This is a complicated process working through FEMA. I'm still learning about it. But the impact on these towns, 21 towns, it was significant. Waterways don't know political boundaries. The most significant damage is in towns outside of my district. I should have introduced myself. I'm Jay Kahn from Keene, represent 15 of 23 towns in Cheshire County. But what was apparent here is that the storm affected a number of communities, and how the state participates in the process of recovery ought to be a consistent approach, not by political influence to have my project be superior to your needs, but that the state have a consistent approach. If one goes back and looks at history from 2005 to 2007, when a series of disasters were declared in Cheshire County, it was in the town of Alstead, and probably people recall the Cold River wiping out a bridge, carrying away roadways. It was a significant disaster, and it took years to settle this out. Thank goodness the state participated in the match process. And so the match process traditionally is a 75% federal appropriation through FEMA in disaster recovery, 25% that requires a local match. Local match could be from state or local funds. In that instance, with the Alstead flood, the state took several years to understand what the total cost of the projects and recovery would be, and then matched the amounts. There's a legislative history on that that dates to 2009, so that the floods that occurred in 2006 and 2007 were finally, the state covered the 25% match. That's what essentially is being sought here. Initially, it was with the idea that if it was 75 and a 25% local, that the local would be matched in two parts, 12.5% from the state, 12.5% from the communities. And why would that be necessary? Some of these are small towns, even if it's a larger community like Keene. These are not budgeted disasters. And nobody's carrying a surplus for a disaster. But in the case of Alstead, if there was $20 million of damage, for instance, 25% of that cost could, wipe out their budget in any given year. So that's probably the top end of what this disaster entails, and then smaller amounts in a variety of other communities that vary in size, but cover communities like Walpole and Keene and Troy and Winchester and Jaffrey and Rindge. All right, so you got that idea. Something that's happened in between here is that the federal government has notified our emergency management department that they will match this storm, this incident, with a 90-10 match. That's really good news. So now we've got a 10% match problem. And in my proposal to the Senate, it was, how do we quantify this? So I took stabs at trying to, I think it'll cost this, or I think it'll. The point is, there was no way to put a boundary on the dollar amount. And so I appreciate that Senate President Morse proposed this amendment, and that's what you have in front of you today. The way that I interpret the amendment is that it is trying to provide a shortcut process for the state to participate in the match dollar amount. The match is not determined by this language, but there is the intent for that match to come forward. FEMA is currently in the process of doing the evaluation on in these 21 towns for 29 different applications, and but the dollar amounts still aren't known, and may not be known until the projects are completed. Here with us today is Jen Harper from Emergency Management Homeland Security, and she can get much further into the details of how this is going to get wrestled to the ground. But the intent here is to provide a shortcut process so that these requests can come through the governor to the fiscal committee, to the executive council, and towns can recoup the dollars and restore stability to their local treasuries. That's the intent. And I hope, and I have to say this, I hope that we will try to establish a fairness principle that regardless of the dollar amount, regardless of the size of the town, that towns who face disasters know that the state is going to be there for them to a certain extent. And we'll need to define that certain extent, whether that's 50% or 100%, as it was in Alstead, what that amount is. So I appreciate the committee taking this under consideration, and glad to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Representative Emmerich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator, last week we heard, had a public hearing on Senate Bill 409, which is this complementary to that, or, because I haven't read all the details of 409, but this seems to be the same kind of thing.
And thank you for bringing that up. 409 establishes a ready loan provision so that towns may not be able to wait the 3 years for FEMA approval for contracts to go through the purchasing process, to collect the receipts, et cetera. It sets up an arrangement where through the state's treasury, there can be a zero interest loan to the town to complete the work and solve an immediate emergency that the town faces. The town is then on the hook for repaying that amount to the state treasury. As FEMA dollars would come in, those dollars would pay down the debt obligation to the state treasurer. And then this would indicate, will the state, through its fund availability, provide some match to further pay down that debt?
Representative Walz.
Like Chairman, Division One Chair Emmerich, I've been trying to figure this out. I've been sitting here flipping back and forth between the two bills, just trying to figure out how they play on each other. So under the one we heard last week, which is 409, they've got to pay back their probably 12%, the town does. Under your bill, is it the idea the state would pay that 12% so that the local communities would be off the hook for their share of what it costs to repair their roads?
Yes, let me clarify you've got the right idea. I'll try to tighten up on the numbers. In this instance, FEMA has indicated that they'll reimburse 90%. There's a 10% town obligation. So if for instance, the town of Alstead, we'll just keep using them. I don't think Representative Ahrens will mind, that if they had a disaster and they wanted to initiate the work immediately, they would go to the state treasury, draw down $5 million to do a project. They would ask for a loan from the treasurer under 409 for $5 million worth of work. They would complete that work and probably along the way find out from FEMA that they would reimburse up to $4.5 million, depending on, is that what the total cost of the project is? But let's just say the project cost and the estimate and the drawdown were all the same amount. So $4.5 million would ultimately be paid or reimbursed to the town by FEMA. That $4.5 million would go directly from Alstead to the state treasury to pay down the $5 million loan. Now we've got $500,000 hanging out there. Of that $500,000, the intent of the original legislation was that 50% of that, $250,000, would be paid by the town and $250,000 by the state. This language here doesn't indicate that share. This language here says, but the state might pay the whole 100%. So there's no share in here. That was the original intent that I brought forward, but this doesn't clarify that. And perhaps the committee would want to do that. On the other hand, precedent was set in 2009, reimbursing the Alstead floods of 2007 at 100% of what the town's obligation was. So, but the state as a participant in these disasters, and why is this important to try to wrestle in this legislative session? Because this could happen again this summer. And having some process and understanding in the towns as to how these emergencies are going to be resolved is something that can come away from this example and this legislative session.
Are there any further? Representative Turcott?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the question. Would I be correct in simplifying the difference between 409 and this bill here, that the difference is one is a grant and one is a loan?
Yes.
Thank you.
Representative Lynn?
So I'm wondering, we heard in connection with 409 that the reason that needed to be structured as loans is that if it wasn't a loan, the federal government would say that's you've already gotten this money. And so I'm just kind of wondering, if this is a grant, do we have the same problem that the federal government is going to say, well, you're not eligible for whatever the amount of the governor's.
Representative Lynn, I think that's a question for Homeland Security, and they're going to testify here shortly. So
Okay, that's fine. Sure. I
if
just
you
know
hold-
whether you might have had an answer.
if you hold that question, I would prefer that
Sure. Okay,
Homeland Security answer that.
that's fine.
Thank you. Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Khan, do you imagine if this bill were to pass that each budget would have a direct appropriation into some sort of a trust fund to be ready to do this, or should this be set up to just be a drawdown on any rainy day surplus? How would you see the budgeting process for this?
Yeah, that too might be a best question to Homeland Security, Emergency Management, because ultimately they need to be the administrator of this, and I would envision that they would be the arm of state government that would bring those recommendations forward to the governor, and the process would then take off from there. And hopefully they would be aligned in some proximate time so that the legislature would see its full exposure from a declared disaster, as opposed to seeing 21 separate requests from different towns.
Are there any further questions for Senator Khan? Representative Irv?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator. Could you just clarify for me how this limits the amount the governor can draw to the amount that FEMA is not picking up? Because it seems to me to just be an open-ended, the governor is authorized to draw whatever money he wants for the municipalities.
I agree that I don't see that this puts a boundary on it, except that it's to reimburse for the costs.
Okay, but you would agree that that's not even stated.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, are there further questions? Seeing none, Thank you, Senator Khan. We're always happy to have you here.
Thank you,
And,
Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll now call on Representative Ahrens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good morning, Finance Committee. For the record, my name is Representative Judy Aaron. I represent Sullivan County District 7, which is Ackworth, Goshen, Langdon, Leominster, and Washington. So I've been here before, and you've all heard my story, so I'm not going to repeat it again. And I did prepare some comments, which I'm not going to read verbatim. I just came here today to ask that you pass this bill, SB 402. It's an important bill, and I think it's got, it's much better than when it was first proposed, because it has turned into what I had hoped would be the most useful for our municipalities that have incurred damage from these natural disasters. And that is, all along, as I've been asking the state and talking to various people about the needs of my municipality, Ackworth in particular, after the July 29th flood, and asking for some financial help for our town, I was constantly being told that there's no statutory mechanism to get money to towns who are in need. And this bill does that because it's fairly open-ended. It is a grant from the state to help a town. The problem that we're having as we're wrestling with SB 402, SB 409, and even the bill that I proposed in the House, which would have set up a municipal disaster relief fund at the state level. The problems that we've run into with this is that if it's not a loan, then you run into problems with reimbursement from FEMA, that they wouldn't give you the amount of money that you need to do the repairs that you need. Sort of put on the side with also the issue of towns needing to do work right away after a disaster happens in order to get them back online and make streets safe and make roads passable for EMTs and emergency vehicles and so forth. So we have this situation where towns need help immediately, or even later on after FEMA does reimburse funds, but doesn't reimburse the entire amount, or maybe doesn't reimburse them at all because maybe there's a problem with the way in which the project was done in the first place. So you have this issue where the town needs money. They could use it in the form of a grant, or the town could take a loan and somehow figure out how to pay that back in the end. The problem is that towns are dealing with the bureaucracy of a federal government, where you submit a project to FEMA for reimbursement. The town has to lay out that money first in the beginning to do the project. And then the reimbursement comes later from FEMA if the project is approved and if FEMA decides how much they're going to reimburse or not.
Representative Aaron, could you please stick to the topic?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
because
the topic is that this particular bill allows for monies to be given to towns that need it, either in the beginning of the process where they might need funds immediately, or later on after the project is finished and money has come back from FEMA but not the entire amount, so that the town can still have access to some funds from the state. This bill allows for a statutory mechanism for the state to give money to a town that needs it after a natural disaster. And I think that's an important aspect. Is the town needs the state really should have a mechanism whereby they can help the towns in these situations.
Thank you very much. Are there questions? All right. Seeing none, thank you very much.
Sure.
I will call on Jennifer Harper from the Homeland Security. Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Jennifer Harper. I'm the Director for Homeland Security and Emergency Management within the Department of Safety. And with me is Vanessa Urango. She is the Program Manager for our Disaster Recovery Program at the state and knows the FEMA guidance inside and out. You may have remembered Fallon Reed sitting next to me previously. Fallon just had a baby yesterday, so.
Oh.
Yes,
Well.
yes, it's all good. Baby boy is here. Everybody's happy and healthy. But so Vanessa is going to be my sidekick for a while. So please be assured that she can answer the questions that Fallon was answering just as eloquently. So I guess questions at this point that people may have, or
Did you have anything you wanted to say about the bill?
no, and I just
Okay, that's fine.
no.
Okay. Now, Representative Lynn, you may ask your question.
Yeah, so the question, it's really the same question that I asked for Senator Khan, is if this bill, as opposed to 409, this bill is a grant, whereas 409 was talking about a loan, is there some danger that if money is distributed to a municipality under the authority that would be granted by this bill, that FEMA would then say, well, the municipality has no obligation to pay it back, so that's not, we can't reimburse you federal money for this grant.
So let me start, and then I'm sure Vanessa's going to jump in. So this would be a grant at the end of the project period, I think. There may be some discussion that needs to happen in a work session or something. But as Senator Khan was mentioning, the communities would get reimbursed from FEMA for a project. So let's just say the town of Jen had a disaster and their 25 streets were damaged. The town of Jen works with Vanessa's group and FEMA. They write up the projects for the 25 roads and submit them as they're worked on. So there's two pieces. There's a small project and a large project. Small projects are up to,
depends on the disaster, but it's around $3,000 and change.
so $3,000. So if it's a small little area, $3,000, FEMA will obligate the money, give the money to the community, fix the road, have a nice day. If it costs them $2,500, they get to keep the $500. Oh yeah, please clarify. This is why she's here.
Thank you. So sorry, to clarify, FEMA has multiple different lanes of projects. There are small projects and large projects. The small project and large project thresholds change on a annual basis based on the federal government, every federal fiscal year. So the small project threshold is the minimum a project must be in order to be eligible for FEMA, and that hovers around $3,000 every year. The large project threshold hovers around $130,000 each year. So if it is $130,000 or over, it's considered a large project and it's reimbursed to the penny for eligible work. Small projects that fall between the $3,000 and the $130,000, variable numbers, are considered small projects. Those can be reimbursed if the work is done or if the work needs to be completed in time. So they can be completed on actuals or on an estimate. If for example, if it's done on an estimate and the community comes in under budget, they can keep the remaining money and do whatever they want with it. If it comes in over budget, then that's the risk that they take on in doing a small project. So that's the difference between the two.
Yeah. So I guess where I was going was for those larger small projects are sort of easy. Those larger projects, in chatting with Senator Khan and Representative Aaron, it could take years for 25 roads to be fixed. And where does this come in? So FEMA would say 2 years from now, they finish Main Street in the town of Jen and they submit all their receipts. They get reimbursed $100,000. And FEMA would pay 90% of that. That 10% is what this would cover. So the $100,000, the town of Jen could come to the governor and say, hey, we don't have the money to cover this 10%. Can we get a grant from the state to cover the $100,000 because our town can't absorb that 10%? So that would be where this would be a grant. And that's fine because FEMA's already paid the 90%. So I think a grant in this case works, right? Yep.
So I will say, it's a good question about duplication of benefits. I believe that's where your question stems from, correct?
It is,
Okay.
yes.
And so it's definitely something to consider. I think that with regard to this being the 10% that FEMA is not covering, it may be worth looking at the language just to ensure that there's no way that FEMA could consider this to be a duplication of benefits. Meaning, if we were to potentially consider, or somebody were to, potentially consider adding language such as this money would be used for the non-federal share or for things that were not eligible under federal funding. So for example, the non-federal share match, which is what the town contributes, the 10%, is not eligible for FEMA reimbursement. Therefore, it could not be a duplication of benefits. Additionally, work that was not eligible under FEMA's program could also not be a duplication of benefits. Thank you.
You look like you have a follow-up.
Well, no, I'm just wondering, I mean, do you, would it be, you don't happen to have any sort of suggested language that you think might accomplish what you want to accomplish?
Go ahead. Except perhaps to say, perhaps something like, this funding could be used on things that are not eligible, on items that are not eligible for federal reimbursement. Something broad that could cover both categories, including non-federal match and things that are deemed not eligible under FEMA's programs.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there further questions? Oh, my heavens. Representative Hatch. I'll go around this way. Go ahead. Oh, you didn't have your hand up?
I did, but he was handed up first. Being a gentleman I am.
All right. Representative Leishman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Representative Hatch. So I'm a little curious, you didn't take a position on the bill, or didn't provide any testimony, so am I to assume, and I never like to assume, that you're not comfortable with the bill unless there's new language to try to clear up perhaps some double funding that this might create or problems with obtaining FEMA money?
So I'm not opposed to this. I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and understands the interpretation of it. So that's my only hesitancy. So I knew I didn't know, but I figured that there would be a number of questions that would come up today. So you're correct in saying that I did not take a stand on it. I didn't want to take a stand on it and then have a bunch of questions come up and me looking like a deer in the headlight going, oh, we hadn't thought about that. So I appreciate the questions that Representative Lynn had and some of the questions that you all asked Representative Khan, because Vanessa and I were both copiously taking notes. And, you know, I think it's really important that we get this right the first time, so that when if this passes, then a town submits for 10%, that they are clearly know the expectation of what they're going to get or what they're not going to get.
Thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Hatch.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In addition to that, but the statement that needs to be added to this bill for clarity stating that for items not covered by a federal grant. Um, my thoughts are, there's a disaster, a town needs money immediately, and I'm not so sure the needs are delineated between what's a federal approved grant, would be approved under a federal grant, and what isn't. So how would that work? Just, if you, do you follow my question? I'm not sure I'm clear on that. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. I think if I have followed today correctly and the intent of the bill, that the intent of the bill is to cover the portion of the expense that FEMA will not cover, which is likely to be things that are ineligible or potentially up to the 10% match for these two disasters that occurred in 2021 in Cheshire and Sullivan counties. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I think in that case, you know, we have two bills that are at work here, 409 and 402. It sounds like 409 is the one that's intended to be the one that's more expeditious of the two, provides that immediate relief, as the name suggests, expedited loan. Whereas this is to come in and help make the community whole after FEMA's reimbursement has kicked in.
Yeah. Just want to be clear. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you.
Representative Waltz?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there any way that FEMA could try, if we pay the 10% federal match out of state funds, does FEMA have a mechanism to try and claw back that money then? Do they have that? Do they do audits or something where they might come back and try and claim that money, or claim that you know, the town wasn't doing this
So,
in good faith?
if I understand your question correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, but they've already said that a town, we're paying the 90% of eligible expenses. What they are not paying is things that are ineligible already. So yes, they do audits, but we're paying that 10%. The state is going to pay that 10% to the community in the form of a grant. FEMA's not, correct me if I'm wrong, going to be able to, it's not federal money, it would be state money that's paying the town. So FEMA can't come back and say, hey, you did something wrong, when they already made a determination that they're paying 90% of fixing Main Street.
I guess, follow up?
Yes, please.
My concern comes from my lack of knowing federal FEMA law, and that is, does the federal law say that the local community has to pay that 10%, or is it just not FEMA pays the 10%?
It's not FEMA that pays the 10%. They don't care. The federal government says, have a nice day, we're paying you 90%, here it is. How they get that 10%, if they get that 10%, they can either do it themselves as the town, or the state can pay it, or, you know, I guess a private entity could pay it, but it's not, it can't come from other federal grant monies.
That alleviates my concern. Thank you.
Okay.
Representative Edwards?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under the assumption that this bill passes, just to set the context, we're 12 months away from having to do our next 2-year budget. How much would you request in the budget for this in each of those 2 years? And assuming you don't know that answer, could you describe the methodology that you might use to come upon a budget number?
So I think that was the original issue with this, that the collective we could not come up with a number to put in the budget, which is how we got to this language, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, Senator Khan is shaking his head yes. So we, all the smart people, including Vanessa and Fallon, there's no way to know for Cheshire and Sullivan County what that 10% is going to be 6 years from now, to be able to put into the 24-25 budget that we're going to need 10 million or 2 million or 50 million, which is why we did this. Now it would be, the community would come after the Main Street project was done 2 years later. Allsted comes to the table and says, hey, we got our 90% from FEMA. The project is closed out. We need $1 million to make us whole again.
Follow up?
All right, I think I understand that. So the need as expressed by Representative Aaron is fast cash now. That the towns need the money right away. What you've described is a look back process once we know what FEMA is going to reimburse and all. So there seems to be a difference in purposes there that I'd like to understand a little bit better. How do we meet Representative Aaron's stated need under this law? I'm not seeing any language even in here to talk about the timing of when the payments are made. It's absent whether or not it's upfront or after the fact. So we at least would need to clarify that in the language, I think.
Thank you. I think that based on what we've heard from Representative Aaron, there are kind of two needs that these communities have. The first is definitely, as you said, fast cash now to help alleviate the immediate burden. But the other half of this conversation is the long-term needs of these communities and their economic viability. So being able to make them whole at the end is going to put them in a position where, they are ready for that next disaster or can at least keep their current budgets running. So I think that's why there are two different bills at play here. With regard to the timing of reimbursement, that's definitely still a discussion that's open. We were trying to decide, do we do this on a project by project basis? Do we wait until the end of the disaster? That would still have to be sorted out, but there's some flexibility there, if that makes sense.
Are there further questions? Yes. Representative Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can we go back to what eligible and non-eligible means? FEMA will cover 90% of eligible projects, 90% of 100% eligible projects. When you were saying, well, this other money could be used for ineligible projects, there's a conflict here that I don't understand. It's not, FEMA doesn't cover 90% of eligible and ineligible projects all at the same time. Those are two different things. So it doesn't seem to me, or it seems to me that there would be a problem to say, well, the ineligible projects could be used for this other 10% because that 10% is based on the 100% eligible projects. So can you address just there's a conflict here I don't understand that I think we would need to understand if we need to straighten out this language to make clear that this 10% isn't impacted and doesn't come back to bite the communities afterwards. Does that make sense? The difference between the two words?
I think so, yeah. So I think the easiest way, and keeping in mind that FEMA's public assistance program has so much depth, there's a lot to it. But if you look at it holistically, expenses that a community has post-disaster are kind of divided into two parts. Those that are eligible under FEMA PA and those that are not eligible or are ineligible under PA. So in this case, 100% of expenses that are deemed eligible in FEMA's program, of that 100%, 90 would be reimbursed by FEMA for these disasters, and the other 10% would hopefully be covered by this bill. Anything that is ineligible, consider it a completely separate number that's not tied to the 10% that we're discussing today. Does that help?
Yeah, if I could, let me just try to give a very simple example. Let's say the main street is the problem, okay? And then you have a feeder street in that wasn't damaged, but you think that you need to fix the culvert on the feeder street, okay? Well, FEMA doesn't think you need to fix that. And so that, if you fixed it, it would be ineligible, okay? But I think that's kind of the easiest way to try to explain some of that ineligible stuff that we'll talk about this afternoon.
Okay, we wouldn't be able to include that, or that would not be able to be included in the 10%.
That's correct. That's correct. Okay, are there, Representative Lynn?
Yes, I guess the one question I have, and it's sort of a follow-up to Representative Edwards' question, is this. If it seems like what we're talking about is that monies that would be dispersed by the governor under this bill would not be happening quickly. It would be sort of at the end of the process. And so if it's at the end of the process, and you were both using the term 2 years as an example, but even if it was only 1 year, I guess I'm just wondering why does it make sense to allow that decision to be made by the governor, the executive council, and the fiscal committee only, as opposed to the full legislature, when presumably, even if it was a year or certainly if it was 2 years, the legislature would be back in session and then the full legislature could consider the matter and appropriate the money.
I think I can speak to the program. Okay. So programmatically speaking, for FEMA's PA process, there are multiple points in its decision-making process where things might be determined to be ineligible, for example. So we've kind of been talking about two different things that this bill could fund: ineligible expenses and the 10%. The ineligible expenses are likely to fall out of that process sooner. So that's kind of on a rolling basis, and that could happen at any time within the process, but likely a lot of them are identified closer to the beginning of the process and fewer as you move on. And the reasons for ineligibility can vary. It could just be the facility, but it could also be, as Representative Ahrens noted, the way that the process was done. Maybe a community didn't follow all of the rules within FEMA's program, for example, and that could lead to ineligibility down the line. But that's kind of a rolling basis. The other part of what this bill would fund, which is the 10%, is determined more at the end of the process. It will be sooner for small projects and a longer process for large projects due to their relative complexities within the program. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Are there any further questions? We're looking forward to seeing you this afternoon.
We shall be here.
I knew it. Thank you very much. Is there anyone that signed in on the blue sheet that hasn't testified? Margaret Burns from NHMA is in favor of this. So, other than that, the other folks have testified. So thank you very much. And as a result, we will close the hearing on HB 402 and open the hearing on SB 412, making an appropriation to the Department of Health and Human Services for nursing home reimbursement rates. And Senator Rosenwald. Oh,
I'm here.
I was looking for you back in the corner. Sorry.
I was hiding in the back.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Cindy Rosenwald from Senate District 13, Nashua. And I'm pleased to introduce Senate Bill 412, which will correct an inadvertent error that was made last spring when the legislature increased nursing home rates by 5% in House Bill 2. This was necessary as nursing homes have seen costs increase, but have not been able to operate at full capacity since the start of the pandemic. The department was directed in House Bill 2 to raise rates by 5% starting July 1st. And as you know, nursing home rate setting is complex. It depends on the number of patients and their acuity. The inadvertent error was caused by another House Bill 2 provision that required reimbursement to be calculated over a higher bed census than has been the reality recently during the pandemic. As a result, the budgeted appropriation for that 5% rate increase was only enough for the department to raise rates last summer by an average of just over 1%. They were able to make a second adjustment in October to about 3.5% going forward, and again in January to fulfill our promised 5% increase. However, the appropriation in House Bill 2 might not be enough to backfill the first half of the current fiscal year or sustain the increase through the biennium. So we worked with the department and LBA on language for a contingent $5 million appropriation in case the budget is not adequate to fulfill our commitment to the nursing homes. If it's not needed, it will lapse at the end of the biennium. I want to note also that this rate increase will not increase costs to the counties. And I think that's important. I hope you'll all agree with me that the legislature keeps its promise and pass this bill. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking the question, Senator Rosenwald. So I was part of the process where we wanted to add the 5% beginning on July 1. So so what I'm going to ask you is really going to sound like I'm opposed to that, but I just want to make sure I understand some logic here. Our logic when we assigned the 5% was that the rates were so low that they were having trouble paying the payroll necessary to attract personnel. So we wanted to give them a bump so that they could afford better wages and hopefully cut down on some of their vacancies. That's why we did it, I think. But now that this bill is coming forward, it's making it retroactive to July 1 to keep the promises, but it's no longer able to be timed to influence the salaries and the hiring. And so it's sort of like the cow has already gotten out of the barn, the damage has already been done, and that what we maybe ought to be doing is, instead of making retroactive to July 1, pick a date in the very near future. And so what do you think about what I just said? What is the underlying rationale at this point, given that there was a mess up? Why should we go retroactive to July 1 since it's not going to hire anyone last August?
Thank you for the question. I think the problem was bigger than only the ability to recruit and retain staff. I think the nursing homes also had higher costs for PPE testing, other kinds of supplies. So I don't think it was only about staff, but I would just reiterate, we made a promise that this would happen July 1st, and I think we are nothing if you can't rely on our word. What credibility do we have?
Follow up.
I agree with the concept of credibility and keeping the word. I just am looking at the 3 letters of support that we received from the New Hampshire Association of Counties, the Alzheimer's Association, and then an individual, Haley DeRosis, and all of them really cite that the money is needed to improve salaries and hire people. So while there may be PPE issues, it isn't being discussed in any of the testimony we've gotten so far. So I guess you're introducing it now.
Well, I haven't seen those letters, but I'd also say that the fact that the nursing homes have not been able to operate at full capacity has an effect beyond the nursing homes, because it has meant that hospitals have had to keep patients beyond their need for hospitalization. And that has resulted at various times over the last year in a lack of available hospital beds in our communities and a necessity to send patients out of the communities and sometimes out of state. So I think we have to look at our healthcare system really as a system. And we should be operating all levels of care at capacity to the extent that we can, because they have impacts beyond themselves.
Are there further questions? I do have a question, and it may be better to ask the counties, but my question deals with the workers. If we don't have the people available to fill the jobs, we can't fill the nursing home. And we have in fiscal given money to help with the hospitalization so they can move more quickly to the nursing home. But am I hearing you say that the problem is staffing at the nursing homes that's causing the problem? Or is it not the staffing, but something else?
I think staffing has been a big issue at nursing homes for a number of years, but it's been exacerbated in the last 2 years. We've had to, for example, nursing homes couldn't have 2 patients per room. I mean, we've had a lot of capacity problems, but a lot of it is staffing, and we're not able to require that funds be directly passed through to increase wages for staff. Medicaid regulations don't allow that. But there are other ways, and we have heard from the nursing homes that their intention is to increase compensation for staff. Of course, we have to fight with out-of-state facilities that tend to pay more than we do no matter what.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for Senator Rosenwald? Representative Hatch.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, just for my clarity, I guess, it's not just the cost of staffing and other materials, but also it's a confluence of items where nursing homes were hit from all ends. For example, reimbursement. You just mentioned that there's a shortfall in reimbursement because only 1 patient per room isn't. So it's not just staffing. It's a plethora of issues. Anywhere a nursing home has expenses, they were impacted, and on top of that, the reimbursement structure was interrupted. Is that?
I think it is. I think it's a complex situation that is not only staffing, but also infection control practices and supplies. But I believe they're here, and they can
Okay, thank you.
explain it better.
All set. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Representative Edwards.
So this may not be for Senator Rosenwald, but is there somebody from the department who's going to testify to us today? And if they're not here now, can they be here for when Division 3 goes over this afternoon? Is there somebody from the department ready to talk about this?
I don't have a pink card.
I
Okay.
do have some questions.
All right. Well, when I get a pink card, she can come up. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one last question from me. This applies to not only county nursing homes, but private nursing homes, for-profit nursing homes, whatever.
It does, because it's a Medicaid reimbursement rate, and in some parts of the state more than others, private nursing homes have residents who are on Medicaid, so it's not just the counties.
I thought that was right, but wanted to absolutely make sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your patience with us for being late.
It got me out of Ways and Means, so I was happy.
Oh,
Thank you.
I won't mention that, okay? All right. Jim Monahan from, New Hampshire Association of Counties.
Great. Good morning. Madam Chairman, I'm Jim Monahan with the DuPont Group. We represent the New Hampshire Association of Counties, and I'm here to support Senate Bill 412. I think Senator Rosenwald and in exchange Representative Edwards captured what we're trying to address here, which was in the budget process last year, there seemed to be a good bipartisan House Senate agreement to try to do a 5% rate increase for all nursing homes. As has been articulated, providing adequate general funds to make that work needs to be corrected. And so we're here to support that. I can certainly get into details if you want, but the funding for this is not a county expense because of provisions that the budget built in last year, including the county cap, which doesn't change as a consequence of this rate increase, as well as for the new cascade of funds, which is articulated in House Bill 2, which ensures that that cascade of funds change so that it would, when it comes to funding a rate increase like this, it would be federal Medicaid money first, the general fund credit, then the general fund, and then the counties. So that combination of the cascade of dollars as well as the county cap ensure that this is not a new expense on the counties. I'm also happy to answer any questions about the mechanics of this, but I think Brooke is probably in a better position to answer how the accounting at DHHS is playing out in this. And I'm sorry, also, I'm sure he's about to ask me, or I can, about the issue around staffing. I can address that as well. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Moynihan, this letter that's from the Association of Counties signed by Wendy Piper, this is, are you able to talk to this letter? Is this
Dated April 11th?
Yes, sir.
And I have copies for the committee. Yes.
Okay, so there's, in the second paragraph towards the right, it begins to say that the daily rate should be no less than 105% of the average daily rate in effect. No less to me implies that it could be more. Is there any intent that it's more than the 5% that we talked about in the budget cycle?
That is not.
Is that a poor choice of wording? Should it just be 105% period?
I mean, if you want to increase it more, I don't think the county nursing homes would object. But I believe that was the language that was included in House Bill 2, and that's why it's rearticulated in 412. Okay, and then with regard to the question around, it's a retroactive provision. I can speak at least for the counties, and as you all know, if you go to your county delegation meetings, you're on the county nursing home budgets. The expectation was this rate increase would happen, and so they planned the budgets accordingly, including staffing budgets. So depending on the nursing home in the county, there's certainly the risk that if the rate increase doesn't happen, there'd be, to meet your budget, you might have to reach into the county funds. As you all know, the county subsidize those budgets anyway. While Representative Edwards raised the question about the retroactive increase on staffing costs, I believe the counties would find a way within the budgets to ensure that those funds are used to cover their staffing budgets.
Excuse me. No, not all right. I'm just trying to think about the county budgets. Okay.
So if your county assumed that they were going to have the 5% rate increase and it doesn't come, then there's a risk they would have to adjust the nursing home budget downward. That's something to consider. The other consideration is, though, that while the counties do pay the non-federal share of Medicaid, this is constructed in a way that this rate increase would not require that the counties match the federal funds.
Mm-hmm. So, I think most counties have finished their budget. Maybe they haven't, but we have in Carroll County, and I have no idea what percent we looked at, but I guess that from that perspective, what Representative Edwards said about not being retroactive makes sense to me, but I'll let you tell me why it doesn't make sense to you.
Some of the counties have calendar budgets, and some of the counties have fiscal year budgets. So I guess my observation had more to do with those counties that are on a calendar year budget.
Okay.
Okay.
Representative Lynn.
So am I understanding, to follow up on Representative Edwards' question about the not less than language? So if I'm understanding, if this bill is approved, it would be authorization to allow an increase above 5%, and in fact to use the $5 million we would have appropriated $5 million to potentially allow that.
Well, I guess I'll make an observation, but at the end of the day, it's probably better that you get direction from the Department of Health and Human Services on that. As I said, the authorization to increase rates up to no less than 105% was included in the budget. So I believe what this legislation is doing is just ensuring that there's an adequate appropriation to meet that obligation.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any further yes, Representative Leishman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess I have a concern on the retroactive portion of this. We've heard about staffing issues. How does that affect going backwards, help with staffing issues last year?
By last year, you mean
Well, the bill says,
prior to June 30th,
Right.
or after June, or after July 1st?
well, it says going backwards to be retroactive. So I'm curious how that.
Representative Leishman, please talk into
Oh,
your
I'm
mic
sorry.
because, as we know, people are listening out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So I'm concerned again with the language retroactive, and we've talked about staffing issues today. How would going back help us with staffing issues? Wouldn't it be better going forward to address staffing issues and use the $5 million going forward to help better pay staff and provide other financials?
Yeah, I'll try to get some clarity before I come back at 3 o'clock for Division 3 on this. So I think that, and again, I think we want to hear from the department around the mechanics of how it flows, and the answer I'll try to get for you, Representative Leishman, is at least for the counties, how would they account for not having the 5% rate increase, and how they have accounted, it may well be that the budgets include the expectation of that, and so they're funding the staffing with the expectation that it will eventually catch up with them.
Okay. I have great faith in Division 3, Madam Chair, so I'm sure they'll take care of it. Thanks.
So do I. Are there any further questions? Okay, seeing none, I have Rosemary, is it Simino? And she represents the Golden View Healthcare Center in Meredith, which I drive by every single day.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so I've been a licensed nursing home administrator in the state of New Hampshire for over 25 years, and I've been at Golden View, which is an independent nonprofit private facility, for over 20 years, and I fully support the bill as it's written. And I just wanted to shed some light. We talked a lot about staffing issues. So one of the questions I think Representative Edwards is, how is this retroactive? Why is that going to help us now? So, we thought we were getting that 5% money. We budgeted staff increases based on that promise. We first quarter have lost $138,000. So getting the money now will help to mitigate those losses going forward. So that, I hope, helps them shed a light on that. I also wanted to talk about, it's not just staffing. Staffing is a huge problem. Golden View has 2 units closed, directly related to staff. And that does impact access to care. We do have to turn away citizens that need our care, and they have to go to places. Now I'm in Meredith, so they have to go sometimes to Nashua or even out of state to get the care that they need. But we also have issues with food, supplies, and utilities. And this is not including pandemic supplies. We've taken out infection control, PPE out of this. Just the cost of utilities have gone up 20%. The cost of food and supplies are up about $2.50 per patient per day. So we are in a serious crisis, not just staffing, but all these other issues that are before us. And I would like to just, yes, the reimbursement is extremely complicated, but as a brief statement, our reimbursement rates are set on historical costs. The January rate setting was based on 2019 costs, and the July rate setting was based on 2018 costs. So they're not even currently reimbursed on our current costs of what we're facing today. On top of that, we have that wonderful budget neutrality factor, which was 22% and 25%. So currently we're at increased costs of about 15% overall to care for a person, yet we're reimbursed on historical cost, with then reduced further by the budget neutrality factor. So we're out of the gate today at a loss of 45%. That's the reality. That's where we're at. We do have a demand for our services. We can't meet that demand because we can't get staff. Not only are the staffing costs astronomically rising, it's also the other things I mentioned, the food, the utilities, and just general supplies. So this money going retroactively is going to help mitigate extreme losses for our facility. And I know I'm not the only provider in this situation. And I did want to mention, somebody had mentioned earlier about what it means when a facility closes or when they have closed units. It's not just affecting the healthcare continuum. As a community nonprofit, we provide many opportunities for the schools to have their clinical rotation at our facility. So it's affecting the local colleges. It affects intergenerational program, elementary school kids coming. We provide education for the community free. So it's not just the healthcare continuum we're looking at. The impact is greater than that on the citizenship of New Hampshire. And the only other final thing I wanted to say is about the staff. And I think the staff are real heroes that continue to work in nursing homes. I really do. Not me, but the direct care staff. It's not just nursing that's affected. It's dining services. It's all the things that have to go into the care of an individual that is at crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the aspect of someone that is actually operating a nursing home. So thank you. Representative Weiler, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having been involved with a couple of nursing homes, I'm told that some of them, excuse me, restrict the amount of Medicaid patients because it's unaffordable. What's the percentage of Medicaid patients in your nursing home?
Yep. We average about 80% Medicaid.
80%.
Yeah, and that's a private
Unusual.
facility.
Thank you.
Yes.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming down. And if there's any opportunity for you to stay for the 3 o'clock work session, I think that that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have Mr. Brandon Williams from New Hampshire Healthcare Association. Excuse me. Kevin, would you take care of handing those things out, please? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair and honorable members of the committee. For the record, my name is Brendan Williams. I'm the president of the New Hampshire Healthcare Association. We represent most of the state's private nursing homes, jointly represent one county facility, also represent the Cedar Crest Center for Children with Disabilities and a number of assisted living facilities. We strongly commend to you this bill. Again, this bill addresses a oversight that was made in the budgeting process last legislative session. It was intended that there be a 5% increase. In fact, we heralded legislators for having provided that increase, and just regrettably, mechanically, it did not happen. We went to work immediately with the department and with sympathetic lawmakers to try to rectify this issue, and our members have known since last summer that a fix was on its way and would be proposed in the Senate, and of course, as you know, has passed the Senate unanimously. With respect to Representative Edwards's question, facilities are not going to enjoy some sort of retroactive surfeit if this money were to be appropriated, but they will use it to staunch their ongoing losses in the provision of care. I've included in my testimony a letter from Catholic Charities, which is my biggest nonprofit nursing home provider. They're projecting a loss for this fiscal year of $1.5 million in their operations. They're not going to be able to operate very much longer with those sorts of losses. And this is an organization that has been providing nursing home care in our state since 1948. I think the same is true of a lot of independent providers that I represent, family-owned facilities, nonprofits, proprietary and nonprofit alike. Everybody is at the edge of a precipice here. Nationally, we've seen a loss of over 400,000 staff for residential care facilities and nursing homes. The Bureau of Labor Statistics lumps those two things together. We actually saw an even greater loss, a continued loss, in February and March under their projections. If you can't staff, you can't build occupancy. If you can't staff, you can't even maintain the care for the residents that you do have, and things become very precarious indeed. I've included data from a national organization that shows that New Hampshire has the nation's 7th worst staffing crisis, but if you look at that list, we're not really far away from number 1. It's just a matter of percentages at this point. We just simply can't find the people. And, all of us are familiar with the concept of the Great Resignation that occurred as a result of the pandemic and people sort of rethinking what sort of work they wanted to get into. And, a lot of opportunities have arisen for folks, and we've seen wage increases in the service economy. And one has to ask oneself, if you're working for a nursing home, why not just go down the street and work for Walmart for more money, or for some fast food franchise and make more money? Because you will. If you're working in the kitchen and dietary department, you definitely will. Because our ability to pay is constrained by Medicaid reimbursement. And I quote in a letter that I submitted to you, my colleague from Kentucky, who sort of makes the analogy between a nursing home and Chick-fil-A. If Chick-fil-A has increased costs, they can pass those costs along to the customer. For us, government's the customer. We can't pass those costs along. And when you hear Golden View say that 80% of their residents are on Medicaid, in response to Representative Weiler's question, under federal law, if you have a Medicaid contract, you can't restrict entry based on ability to pay. So it's first come, first serve. And so if you've got a Medicaid person who's applying to go into your facility at the same time that a private payer is, it's whoever got first in line. And chances are you can't admit either at this point, just simply because facilities can't staff to build their occupancy. When you look at the fact that we have an average occupancy of 77% right now, we were as high as 86% before the pandemic. That's a recipe for disaster. This is an extinction event. Facilities are not going to be able to continue to operate if they cannot fill those beds. And I include the examples of some other states and what they've done. On April 7th, the Nebraska unicameral overrode the governor's veto and gave nursing homes a 15% rate increase. And that's after the governor himself had given them a $20 a day rate increase. You see examples in any number of states, whether they be Republican states or Democratic states, of legislatures rushing to the fore because this is a crisis throughout the entire country right now. And we have been very grateful for the CARES Act funds that have been allocated to us by Governor Sununu, by the Executive Council, by the Joint Fiscal Committee. But we're going to need additional assistance. Even this 5% rate increase is but a drop in the bucket compared to where we are at right now. We are bleeding, and this will not staunch that bleeding. You will see closures of nursing homes throughout the state. And when a nursing home closes, vulnerable people are displaced, and they're no longer cared for in their community. They're displaced far away in many cases, and staff lose their jobs. And in some communities, those nursing homes are among your largest employers. So it's a desperate situation, and we really thank you for considering this bill because, again, it would effectuate what it is that you intended to do, what it is that providers relied upon in knowing that this legislature was trying to do the right thing effective last July 1st. And so every aspect of this bill is commendable. If anything, we would wish it to be increased. And we thank you very much for your consideration. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? Representative Edwards?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, very compelling testimony. Thank you. A lot of good information in there. I am trying to parse together a couple of things you said, that we're facing sort of an existential threat with our nursing home continuity, and that we have a long-term employment problem. And if we got a long-term employment problem, we can certainly spend this 5%, but how does that stop or halt the existential threat that you're referring to when we're still confronted with a long-term problem? This bill may be necessary, but it's not sufficient. What must we do to really address this?
Thank you for your question, Representative. I have to have the humility to say I'm not sure. Certainly this bill isn't enough in terms of what it would do. You're right. This is a long-term crisis. Right now, facilities are resorting to out-of-state staffing agencies in order to just simply maintain staffing. Those agencies have increased their prices to the point where you might be paying $50 an hour for a licensed nursing assistant. Once these out-of-state agencies enter your facility, they start hiring away your own staff. whereupon you're then paying the agency for your own staff to work for you. And it really feels like we're swirling down the drain. I think something like the examples of what the other states have done in terms of an appropriation of American Rescue Plan Act funds would be very helpful. We have to get through this moment. And, that's really what we're focusing on right now is just simply survival and getting through this moment. And for many providers, it feels like that's almost impossible. But I can say with respect to this bill, Representative, that, increasing the base rate by 5% is something that you can then build on going forward. You'll recall that in the previous biennium, Medicaid rates for all classes of providers were increased by 6.2%. There was two separate increases of 3.1% per annum. And so actually this increase is less than that, and we're amidst a pandemic of, just horrendous consequences for all of healthcare. So, whatever additional funding this general court is willing to provide would be greatly appreciated, but this is the minimum, I think, in terms of what can be done. And I hate to be so gloomy, but these are the facts.
Are there any further questions? Representative Waltz?
Thank you. It sounds to me like what we need to do is figure out what kind of increase you need to be competitive with the private market, and not just in healthcare, but the private market across the board in skilled jobs, and that's the amount of money we need to give you guys. That there is a solution, but that's what it is. And we need the money people to crunch those numbers and figure out what the rate increase is, and then we need to dig deep into our pockets and find that money and make you guys competitive so that the beds can be open. Because I will use an example. Our dear friend who just died this weekend was supposed to be moved to a nursing home, and they could not find a nursing home bed for her, which would have kept her in the hospital at a much greater cost than a nursing home bed. And that's what it means not to have beds available. And that's really close and personal at home for us.
I want to express my sympathy for the passing of Representative Rogers, who's a very good person. It seems as too many good people in this general court have passed of late. And you're absolutely right. I mean, that is a consequence. It was referenced that there has been sort of a piecemeal effort, and by calling it piecemeal, I'm not disparaging it, but there's been a piecemeal effort on the part of the state to try to ease hospital capacity by providing some staffing, again, through staffing agencies, to certain nursing homes in order to relieve some of that hospital backlog. But again, piecemeal effort. And so that problem still exists, that those who are in the hospital setting may not be able to access a nursing home for discharge. And it's obviously inappropriate for them to stay in the hospital setting. And of course, if the state's a payer in that instance, it's going to cost a heck of a lot more if the state's paying through Medicaid. We also have the situation where those in home and community-based services, which we fully support, by the way, may need to step up, not forever, but may need to step up to a nursing home level of care. And if they are unable to do that, what's going to happen? They're going to end up in a hospital because they're going to get so sick that they're going to end up in a hospital. And then, irony of ironies, they won't be able to be discharged to a nursing home because there won't be a bed available. So it really is a systemic problem. It's all interconnected, I think, as you point out. What happens with nursing homes affects the home and community-based services. What happens with nursing homes affects the hospitals.
Are there further questions? I do have one.
Yes.
And if I heard testimony correctly, over the course of the 22 biennium, you have received some percentage in the nursing homes. And maybe this is a better question for HHS, but I'm not exactly sure. Right now, the law said 105%. If you got 3% in one quarter, then I give you 2% to make up for that. If I got 1%, then do I give you 4%? Because I can't just give you an across the board 5% for that whole time, because the nursing homes over time have received something. So that becomes a nightmare for anyone to try to solve if we go retroactive. And that if we start 1 January or whatever date it is on the calendar year, we may not have that kind of horrible situation to try to figure out that you got 3%, these were your costs, this was, anyhow, I just mentioned that.
Just to answer, Madam Chair, the department was involved in the construct of this legislation, and some of the increases that were referenced were really the consequence of what's called the case mix index. And so the acuity of the residents, the physical need of the residents. And so that will cause, within the resources appropriated by this body, that will cause the rates to obviously creep up. And as was also referenced, there was a switch to a new cost year during the biennium as the basis for reimbursement. That too will also cause things to creep up. Again, that cost year is only now 2019. We haven't entered the pandemic cost years in terms of the reimbursement, but that will explain why there has been some increase in the rates separate from this legislature's intent to increase them by 5%.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is anything else? Thank you. I now call on Brooke Belanger. I'm sorry that I didn't realize you were here, Brooke, and we would have had you in earlier, but thank you so much for being here, and I know that you are the font of all answers, so we're
I wish
looking
that were
forward to-
true.
Oh, it is. It's got to be.
Certainly, when Director Henry Littman is here this afternoon, he will be able to give you much more detail than I can, but I'm happy to do my best this afternoon. I don't know if you want me to give you a quick response to some of the questions I heard, or if you'd rather direct the questions at me.
No, I think that would be wonderful.
Okay. There was some conversation about the language of no less than 105%. If I could shed a little bit of light on that, that is because rates are based on average rates for all facilities rather than any one facility. And so you need that language in there as a result of those average rates for all facilities. I would also say that adjusting a nursing facility rate and giving them an across-the-board rate increase, as was intended by this body in HB2, there are a lot of different mechanisms that contribute to the nursing facility rate. And so there are different levers, including the county cap that Jim Monahan spoke about, that impact nursing facility reimbursement. And so it's a little bit harder to adjust and make that rate increase with, it's hard to make it just a blanket. And so these levers are there in place. And this bill is really a contingency plan to ensure that the department is able to pay the facilities. And I certainly, the committee has heard the situation and is well aware of the situation in nursing facilities. But this bill allows us to carry out the directives of this body in HB2. I would also note that there is a provision in here to ensure that any unused funds would lapse, so that any concern of spending more than that 105% increase would come back and would lapse. But again, that language of no more than is there because rates are based on an average rate for all facilities. And as Brendan Williams spoke about, there's a case mix index, there is acuity rates, there's utilization. As this body knows, utilization has decreased for a number of reasons, staffing a component of it. But if we see volume come back in the next year of the biennium, these funds will certainly be needed to ensure that we can meet that rate increase that was directed in HB2.
Are there any further questions? Representative Weiler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am curious, if we put 5% increase in the budget, why it wasn't paid?
The effort to get the funds to the facilities was done, was carried out by the department. There are a number of different funds that get used to pay out the rates. And I believe it was Mr. Monahan who indicated that there is a cascade of how funds get used. There are funds that are appropriated by this body. There are federal funds and there are county funds. And so those get used to pay out the rates. And then there's the 504 account as well, which gets paid out to facilities. So when using those different levers and those different sources of fund, the efforts to meet those increases was out there. This bill ensures and provides a contingency to make sure that there are sufficient funds to meet that intention.
Follow-up. I still don't understand why if we put the 5% in the budget, the testimony seems to indicate it never got paid. And you're not answering why.
I apologize. I don't mean to not be answering your question. So there have been rate increases. There have to the facilities at different points in the year. There have been percentage increases. There was also language in HB2 that was the number of days, I believe, that impacted the ability to carry out that rate increase. And when Director Littman is here this afternoon, he can speak a bit more articulately to that. I don't want to swim above my head, if you will, and give you the wrong information.
Thank you.
Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And okay, so in the military, we used to do things called after-action reviews. After you conducted an exercise, good, bad, or indifferent, you figured out what went right and what didn't go right. Okay, we obviously did something wrong, right? Because we had the intent, and by we I mean me. I was the chair of Division 3, and I did not catch whatever the HB2 issues were that created this cascade, right? So I'm not going to beat myself up, but what I would like to do, though, is to take your oral history, the oral history of Mr. Monahan, Mr. Littman, whoever else, Ms. Rounds, and document it in a nice, tight description of exactly what went wrong so that we don't do this again. I'd really like to understand that, okay? So, so if you could maybe prep Mr. Littman to speak to a document that describes in sort of an after-action review format, and I can give you that. I want to know what we did wrong, because the legislature apparently put some conflicting guidance in HB2 that when it got time to execute at the department level, you guys got contradictory information and failed to do what we intended you to do. So we just need to understand that. Is that fair?
We can provide a description of what the conflict was, what the language of conflict was, and the efforts that we have made to meet those terms. But I understand what you're asking, and we can bring that back to you.
And just so you know, that's wholly independent of whether or not I'm going to support this legislation. I just want to make sure that we understand what went wrong.
Thank you.
And I don't. And I think Representative Weiler doesn't fully understand it yet either. And I want to make sure I can explain it to him.
Thank you. I will make sure that the committee has the information that you've asked for.
All right. Thank you.
I also might want to point out that although Representative Edwards didn't give you kind of a timeline, it's short. Okay.
I am quite confident that Director Littman can answer many of these specifics this afternoon for you, and any follow-up documentation that is needed as soon as I get back to the office, we'll start working on.
Okay, thank you. Because I don't want to, anyhow. Short is my problem, but if we don't have the right information, then it becomes everyone's problem.
I am fairly confident in saying that this afternoon, many of these questions will be cleared up, and any additional supporting documentation that the committee would like, we will make sure we make that a high priority to get
Thank
that.
you. Representative Lynn, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Can I go back to, because I'm not quite sure I understand your explanation of the no less than. In other words, if I understand correctly, you said that you need that language because the reimbursement rates are determined on an average of reimbursements to a group of homes. Is that a group of nursing homes? Is that correct? Or?
Individual rates are set on a number of factors, case mix index, so the acuity of the individuals, they are cost based. There are a number of factors that go into the rates. And so it is different than saying we're going to set a 5% rate on increase on $100. It's not a set base across the industry. And so because there are multiple factors and there are different rates among different facilities based on cost and case mix index and a number of factors, that language of no less than 105% is needed to ensure that they get the rate increase.
So may I ask a follow-up?
Yes, you may.
So am I understanding from that what that means by what that language would mean is that in other words, to get to an average, that means there has to be some above and some below. And am I understanding that what this language would mean is that effectively you would take the lowest and make sure that reimbursement increased 5%, with presumably the result that there would be that some that were above the average would increase more than 5%?
So the goal is to ensure that the 5% increase for HB2 is carried out. I want to, if I could have the opportunity to take that back and confirm what the range would be, I can bring that back. I understand that's an important question and I don't want to misspeak on what that would look like. So if I can have the opportunity to take that back, I will bring that information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Representative Turcott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the question. I've heard it several comments today about talking about unused funds would lapse. Not that I anticipate there would be any unused funds, but where does it specifically talk about lapsing funds?
I believe that in line, if you may give me a moment. In order to use these funds, the department has to make the request for them, and then
Brooke, it's not there.
okay, I apologize. So I believe it's based on my understanding of it was that we would only be able to have the funds that were needed based on an articulation and the request for those specific funds.
To be clear, you weren't the only person who said that they would lapse, so that's why I asked.
I appreciate that.
So I have a question of the chair.
Oh, me?
Please.
You think I have an answer?
I think on this one you might.
Okay.
Because I was looking at this, looking for the same language, whether the word non-lapse or lapse was used, and because it's not in here, I'm just curious. Do we just assume all monies that we appropriate in a 2-year cycle are to lapse unless we've explicitly said non-lapsing? And because we haven't specified non-lapsing in here, does this mean this defaults to a lapse?
You're absolutely correct. And that's probably why it doesn't say anything in here. Because
It always does.
that's the way it goes. Okay, are there any further questions for Brooke? All right, seeing none. Oops, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I have no one on the blue sheet that hasn't testified. So I thank you. And for those of us on the fiscal committee, we'll get back together at 1 o'clock. And I believe most of the divisions are meeting at 3. So we'll see you then. Have fun.
Someplace?
Just
Yes. You can watch this, I want you to. Keep you posted, okay? I know, you know what, when you're still going there. So Sharon Nordquist has been in the hospital. Well, after Dartmouth, it's about her for AFib. She was in there like 5 days. She was more than able to. Anyway, she met Lisa and they're now, she now visiting her now. So she stayed a couple days. Oh my God. It's Mary and Tom are up there. And the baby. That's what I looked at. It's an honor. Oh, yeah. Don't go anywhere while I'm there. I went home and slept for 3 hours. I think I got 12. But I was like, yeah, okay, 5 hours. But, I mean, I'm happy only because they're working on the I had trouble in the service. Not that I saw it happen. It's just a crusade. I get that. No, I get that. He really helped.